The comments and statements made within the show are the opinions of the commentators and their guests, have not been evaluated by the FDA, and are in no way attempt to diagnose, treat, mitigate, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. The contents of the show are not to be construed as medical advice. If you have a health condition or health concern, please contact a licensed, qualified healthcare practitioner.
I'm Nan.
And I'm Tom. And this is the Supplement Super Sleuth.
That'll be me. And the Herbal Storyteller.
And that definitely would be me. And together, we're going to take a peek behind the curtain of the natural products industry.
We'll be sharing naturals in the news, dispelling lots of myths, interviewing key players in the industry, and highlighting our favorite herbs and supplements.
So with that, let's pull back that curtain and see what's there.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Nan, how are you today?
I'm really good.
Cool.
We'll be starting our podcast with a segment called Naturals in the News, and we'll be focusing on headlines on natural herbs and nutraceuticals.
And it's really, think of it this way. You get up in the morning, you have your cup of tea, you have your cup of coffee, and one of the things you do is you read the paper, or maybe you turn on the news because you want to know what's going on in the world. Well, for Nan and I, having been so long in the natural products industry, we're always interested in what's going on in the news in the natural products industry. So, Nan, what did you find for us today?
Oh, great. So some of the headlines I picked out, I think I have 3 or 4, but I'm going to start with this one. The headline read, Pandemic-Induced Demand and Inferred Herbs and Supplements Created a Field of Dreams for Adulterators. Now, adulterators in the natural products industry means that they gave the wrong herbs, or they used the wrong herb, saying that it was the herb that was what people were looking for. For example, they used a weed instead of ashwagandha, or they used something by the roadside for turmeric. Okay, that's a poor example, but that's what we're talking about. Or they spiked the nutraceutical, or the nutraceutical compound wasn't accurate or correct. So what happened was there was such a demand for natural substances. I think people just wanted some self-agency. There was a lot out on the internet, which we'll talk about in a second. There's a lot on the internet that led people to panic buy. And these are people that are not familiar with the natural products industry, and they're not familiar with herbs. And instead of going to see a clinical herbalist or a naturopath or a nutritionist or someone who's been steeped in the understanding of the natural products industry, they purchase right on the internet thinking that all is the same. But, I think it really bears the conversation. And it's one of the reasons why Tom and I are doing this podcast, is to shed some light and to dispel myths and to open the doors for people to get to know the natural products industry. So that was the first headline. Anything to say about that, Tom?
Really what it means is that with the supply chain issues, which we're now hearing about, if you stop and think about it, at the beginning of the pandemic, everything was closed down. Nobody had anything to treat it. It was absolutely novel. No one had ever seen it before. And so it created a panic. And that panic was a buying panic of, well, all I know is I need to help my immune system. Anything and everything at that point that was touted as to helping the immune system was selling like hotcakes. And like the headline says, and the gentleman who put that headline out is a man named Mark Blumenthal, who has been part of the American Botanical Association for a long, long time, started it, as a matter of fact. And he was warning of the fact that, look, this is the opportune moment for people who are a little bit shady to mix things. So my family background is beekeeping in one sense. And I know that with honey, for instance, a lot of times people will buy honey and then they will cut it with high fructose corn syrup to make it go farther. And they think nothing wrong with that, but in fact it changes everything about it. So this is a big deal, and what it points to is the fact that if you want to know what you're getting, you want to work with people who do their due diligence and who have a reputation of doing their due diligence. So work with the big companies, work with the companies who have established themselves as being reputable and dependable.
Yes, and in the future episodes, you'll be able to meet a lot of these people, hear what they have to say, hear how they run their companies. So, keep listening, keep showing up, because this is what we're all about. And okay, so our next headline is, "This is just the tip of the iceberg for ginger," and that was found at OmniActive. And so ginger is a beloved herb and spice. So yes, you can cook with it, and it's delicious. And you can make cookies with it.
It doesn't necessarily mean that your gingerbread man is therapeutic, but that's another story.
That's another story. But what's really interesting is it's starting to gain more support as an herb of commerce. Now, an herb of commerce is an herb that's had an enormous amount of research done and has been elevated to a place where now we know its safety. Now we know there have been human clinical trials, and it's gaining strength in the industry, and people are buying more of it to help support their daily health, if you will.
Well, and I think part of it, again, not to continually refer back to the pandemic, but part of it again is to understand that ginger has a phenomenal capacity for dealing with the inflammatory processes in the body. And with with this novel virus and everything else and runaway inflammation, it is something that has really, like the headline says, it's just the tip of the iceberg for ginger, because now it's being looked at in so many different ways. And it's got a cousin in the herbal, world that goes by the name of turmeric, and everybody knows about turmeric, and pretty much we know turmeric, and we know one compound in turmeric called, curcumin. And so we think, okay, they're the same, but it's just one aspect of that amazing herb that we know as turmeric, and that's the curcumin. There's so many other compounds in turmeric that are so beneficial. So the same thing is happening with ginger. This is just a wonderful little headline to give a heads up to, hey, you haven't seen nothing yet with what ginger is able to do.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And the third headline that I have is about omegas and omega-3s. And then there was a pilot study. So the study is interesting. It's very, very small. It was done with preschool, a handful of children, and a very small amount of omega-3 as a supplement, so not found in the diet, supplemented to the diet. Of course, we don't know anything about the diet in this particular study. And so basically the headline read, "The Omega Kid pilot study has failed to demonstrate that omega-3 supplementation improves self-regulation in preschool age children." So, it's a little bit of a suspect. I don't want you to be thrown in a direction that makes you think that omega-3s are not good for kids or not good for people. That's not really true. We need more data, and we need bigger studies, and we need people to feel more comfortable with omega-3s with preschoolers. But we do know this, is that omega-3s are found in food, and that we know when we supplement the diet, even if it's a good diet, it has been found to be helpful in children who are in school to help them with cognition and focus. So we want to support children while they're in the stage of learning and developmenting. And it's very important that omega-3s are in the diet. And sometimes we have to supplement the diet because you know how kids are. Try getting them to eat a piece of salmon. So,
well, and that's an interesting thing that I sort of maybe reading between the lines here is that, fails to improve self-regulation in preschool age children who might have been fed a ton of sugar before they went to school. or whatever. So it's kind of like, from my point of view, kids are kids. They're going to be rambunctious and wild, and you almost want them to be more wild than you want them to be, sedate and calm, and because that's what they are. And the study doesn't really talk too much about whether it was EPA or DHA. And yet we know that the omega-3 DHA is very much involved in neural development and brain development, especially in the pregnant woman, in the fetus. And we also know that women who don't have enough omega-3s, especially DHA, when they give birth, they're much more prone to things like postpartum depression because of that effect on the nervous system. So, as Nancy said, it's just a pilot study. It's not I wouldn't take this as saying, oh, okay, I'm not going to give my kids omega-3. I think it's just the opposite.
Sure. And there's one more headline that I want to cover, and it has to do with a product that is claiming that they were on an episode of Shark Tank and they won. And then they also are making claims that they're being used effectively for weight loss by many celebrities. So Tom and I did a very deep dive into this, and Shark Tank does not have an episode that talks about any nutraceutical or such. And a lot of the celebrities who were posted on this particular website or landing page, if you will, have denied using this product to lose weight. So I want to make something really clear. The natural products industry knows very well it's not DSHEA compliant. We're going to talk about DSHEA in future episodes, but it's not compliant to make claims related to weight loss. The most reputable companies in the industry would not do that. So if you're on the internet and you're desperate to lose weight and you're thinking that the answer is going to be easy and found on the internet, please don't do this to yourself, because the reputable companies wouldn't go down that road. So this is a disreputable company. And although the compound that they're using in their formula, of course, you know me, I went and checked it out. I ordered it on purpose to look at the ingredients list and to see what else is in the tablet. And that active ingredient, the clinical trials were not done on weight loss. They were done on building muscle mass, and they were done on senior men. So the original clinical trial was done on senior men to build muscle mass for men who have lost muscle mass. So yes, it's a real compound, HMB, which is hydroxymethylbutyrate, but it's not what the clinical trials were about. It was not about weight loss. So to make those kinds of claims is so misleading and so upsetting. And of course, that is not a reflection of the natural products industry that Tom and I are a part of, and that we know.
So, and again, what it points out is the fact that, unfortunately, with the internet, the amount of regulation that goes on, sometimes there appears to be too much regulation and people are being taken off the air because they're holding views that nobody else wants to hear, or somebody else who's in control doesn't want you to hear. But there's also people who get out there and they can run an ad with very slick marketing, with a high, production budget, if you will, knowing that they're going to get a lot of people who come in and buy the product just because, wow, you showed me pictures of scientists in labs and you showed me pictures of all of these horrible things happening to the people who didn't take a product like this. And just understand that you need to take it with a little grain of salt, and you need to do your due diligence and find out. Don't just take somebody's word for it because they're wearing a lab coat and tell you that they're a doctor. There's been a couple of instances where either Nancy or I have gone out and tried to look up the doctor in the ad in particular, and we couldn't find that individual to exist anywhere. So just let the buyer beware on that one. So what do you think?
And I know I'm called the Supplement Super Sleuth, but he's a sleuth too. So, and I'm also a clinical herbalist, and so we're both doing both of our jobs together. So what do I think? I think, yeah, absolutely. I think this is absolutely a perfect time to start our next segment, which is called Naturals in the Know. And this is a segment where we're going to be bringing on a special guest, and a special guest from the natural products industry, or from laboratories or from quality control. And we're going to allow them to kind of share what they do and how they're creating a more safe and more effective natural products industry in general. So
it gives us a chance to know more about what's behind the curtain of that industry.
Okay, we're going to be starting our section called Naturals in the Know, when we invite special guests to talk about what they love about the natural products industry and how they support this industry as it starts to develop into a much more ethical and much more highly developed group of people supporting natural remedies and herbs.
And Nan, there are many things about this industry, the natural products industry, that are in effect hidden from the view of the general public, especially as it relates to things that go on the internet or on validation of what it is that we do. Often there can be such confusing and conflicting information out there that people either give up on this industry as a whole, or they buy anything they see advertised, especially on the internet, as natural, or anything alluding to natural, because they're either desperate, they've gotten no other results with anything else, or they're misled into thinking it's all the same thing. So I really love this idea. I think what we should really do is talk to some industry experts about different aspects of this kind of glaring and image destroying problem that we have. And so to that end, today I'm really excited to be talking to Mr. Gordon Enns of Inflammatory Markers Laboratory. And I know, Nancy, you've had some wonderful interaction with Gordon, and I'm going to let you do the primary introduction and let Gordon take it from there.
Gordon, it's so great. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Supplement Super Sleuth and the Herbal Storyteller. I had the pleasure of meeting you at a trade show many years ago, and started, I started asking questions about your analysis that you have, and then I met Elena, who is spectacular, and we worked together on a pilot. And then we worked together on a clinical trial. So I really wanted to have you on the show today to share what your laboratory does, because what you're doing is remarkable and so important. And what you found by being the director of this laboratory, and how that has impacted the natural products industry, how you've actually helped the natural products industry as a whole. So take the floor and share your wisdom. I'm sure our listeners will just love to hear what you...
Thank you so much, Nancy and Tom. It's a pleasure meeting you, Tom. And yes, Nancy and I have had some great moments sharing a lot of questions at various trade shows, and it was definitely a delight in doing the studies and the projects. So maybe it might be appropriate if I gave a little background on how I got into this, where I'm at today and where the lab is at. That'll be okay. So it started many, many years ago. I graduated from college with a chemistry degree, didn't want to teach high school chemistry, and so went to the University of Colorado in Denver and the medical center there, and started doing research with a doctor who was about 25 years ahead of his time, Kurt Nicholas von Kalle. He was a pioneer in thrombosis, come over from Germany, and just amazing. Brought streptokinase with him, thought leader, and I like that. I guess I like being on the cutting edge of something, and so completely fascinated by and back then the only real probably of the congenital things we knew about was antithrombin 3. No protein C, no protein S, no factor V Leiden, and yet we still figured people at risk. So that was the days of Coumadin and heparin, pretty much. And most practitioners knew very little other than what they learned in medical school, just give this. So one night, well, that led me ultimately to start a laboratory. Von Kaula went back to Europe. There was a void, so I started a laboratory called Colorado Coagulation Consultants. And as the name implied, that's all we did was coagulation testing. And as today, that lab now, I sold it, I guess, in 1998. It's now owned by LabCorp, and they're still operating Colorado Coagulation Consultants. So one night, we're doing a big clinical study on our lab is kind of a regional testing site. So we were invited to a dinner where a thought leader, Valentin Fuster, was the PI, giving this talk about this study that's going to happen. 125 cardiologists in the room around the dinner. And so halfway through, Dr. Fuster says, the day is coming. We're going to have to dose aspirin. And I nudged my technical director and I said, Flo, what are we going to do? Bleeding times? Platelet aggregation? I don't think so. So that led me to start looking for a test that could be uniform, just almost universally performed, that was very user friendly, that could tell you if aspirin's actually working. And that test is what we now, it's a thromboxane metabolite, therefore cyclooxygenase 1, cyclooxygenase 2 convert arachidonic acid to thromboxane. And thromboxane then activates platelets, does a lot of things, and so is involved in all of the various chronic diseases. So that led to actually getting the test FDA cleared to measure aspirin effect. I won't go into why, well, I might a little bit. The people say, well, so why did that not really catch on big time? Because it tells you if aspirin works, and it doesn't appear to work in a lot of people. It's actually COX-1 is inhibited. But the reason it never caught on big time in the traditional medicine world was because there are no guidelines that you should monitor platelet therapy. So unlike a statin, you could never give a statin without doing some cholesterol, lipid, the LDLs and the whole thing. So that, to me, that made sense then that we needed to come up with this. But it's not going to work. And if there's not guidelines, there's probably not reimbursement. So time went by, and I was privileged. I sold the lab, but I kept working with this test. And that's how I met Dr. Barry Sears of Zone Labs, who was truly a guru and mentor to me. And I give him all the credit for shifting my interest now into chronic inflammation. Didn't give up on the thromboxane and aspirin. That's still a vital part, and I think aspirin is going to come back in the right dosage into a very valuable added addition to the various therapies. So Barry made it very clear in our conversations over years, actually, of the role that the various products can play in affecting this, and they're treating inflammation and all these things. I can still see them on the board just writing away, and oh my gosh,
I
this is
actually
so
remember
cool.
that too, Gordon.
So
Yeah.
so Barry convinced me that aspirin is effective on the platelet 98% of the time, but COX-2 through inflammation is driving bypassing that effectiveness. And so as long as you're continuing to make thromboxane, you're still at risk. So that then became the focus. So now that took a while just to get to the topic. I'm sorry. So now I've got this new vision dancing in my head that, wait a minute, we're related to chronic inflammation. This is big stuff. I went to the A4M meeting in Las Vegas prior to probably 6, 7 years ago. I started going through the exhibit hall, and I kept seeing all these booths with, reduces inflammation, eliminate chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, all these products. And I had so much fun going up, and I'd let them sell me for a little bit, and then I would say, you know what? I have a test. How do you know that's actually working? Back to the Valentine Fuster, the day is coming. We're going to have to dose. How do you know the dose is working? And so that was a very enlightening experience, which continued for multiple trials, and I was very convinced in my mind. So, long story short, we took this test that was actually FDA cleared, it still is, to measure aspirin effect. So we took this test and we started a laboratory, Inflammatory Markers Laboratory, and we validated this test as an inflammatory marker, if you will. We utilized, we had 160 people, questionnaire on wellness, collected a first morning urine and a fasting blood. We performed a CRP, a fibrinogen level, a white count, and we used the data to eliminate anybody that had any suspicion of inflammation. We utilized that urine as our reference range. And so we ended up with, I think it was 102 or more, and we've continued to add to this over the years. So that's how it's not FDA cleared to measure inflammation. We say it assists in diagnosing and managing chronic inflammation. So that experience then at these trade shows led, once we were set up and established, we were very fortunate and I won't use names, but several of the very thought-leading naturopaths actually in the world understood the value of this test, began using it 4 years ago, and continue to do so today. And that number, as Nancy mentioned earlier, has certainly continued to grow, and we're finding the interest in that. So having that started, practitioners are understanding it. That gave me the basis now to go to the product providers, as we call them, therapeutic product providers. And so I would say, well, wouldn't you like to do a little study? Let's see what this is doing and if it works. And I also am thinking at the time that things are going to start getting tough. The FDA is going to begin to put more emphasis on the product and the science around that product. Therefore, the more data you can get, and hopefully incorporating biomarkers into that data, makes a lot of sense. At the same time, healthcare providers are going to start asking, well, how do I know this is really doing something? And my patient, I'm giving them whatever, and my patient says they're not getting better. Well, maybe you've changed some chemistry and it's still not showing up. And then I think at the same time, I think it's a triangular approach. The consumer is going to become much more discerning as time goes on. And I truly believe that COVID has just put a stamp on all of this. And I think it's also provided huge impetus to the natural, functional wellness approach of medicine, in the fact that look who's dying and who's severely handicapped by COVID. It's the people that aren't following your advice. They're not changing their lifestyle, diet, nutrition. And all of these things are measured, are effective at modifying inflammation. And we can talk about that a little more later. We've just completed a study with Dr. Paul Goebel and his group in Baltimore, utilizing this test on hospitalized patients just admitted to the hospital with COVID, diagnosed COVID. And at the end of the study, about a year, it was about a year that this has gone on, we were able to demonstrate we predicted outcomes, we predicted days in the hospital, and we predicted oxygen utilization, all based on how much thromboxane is being generated by this cytokine storm and everything else that's going on.
And this is, and Jordan, just to interrupt you for a second, and this is all from a urine test.
All from a urine test. Yes.
That's amazing. Most people are familiar with the idea of, okay, now I have to go get a blood draw and I have to go through this and I have to go through that. It's fascinating.
Yes, and that was part of our thought way back on the aspirin side. We need things that people can collect a specimen at home. They don't have to go into the doctor. And again, COVID has sort of stamped that. But what makes that work is there's actually two components. What we measure is thromboxane A2, a metabolite of thromboxane A2. When inflammation is one of the major pathways of inflammation, the thromboxane A2 pathway relies on arachidonic acid as the substrate, and then the activity of nuclear factor kappa B in the cell to turn on genes, which creates the gasoline and the match, and that fire, and that's so that's what we measure. So in order to standardize or normalize this now, what we do is we do a urine creatinine as well. So we like to do a first morning urine or recommend that, but it's not mandatory. Obviously, it's going to be normalized with the creatinine. The thing I like about it is the first morning is the fact that typically you're standardizing the condition of the patient, so to speak. They haven't just run a marathon. They've now, if they had bad dreams, nightmares, maybe that's not been so good, but they haven't just finished a big fatty meal. And inflammatory tests, and I'm not just saying this, our chronic inflammation test. And someday I'll tell you the story about Stanford and what they showed with eating meat, and 4 hours later looking at inflammatory markers. So from a practitioner, I'm sure most of them, hopefully at least, are, what did you eat the last few hours before we drew your blood or collected your urine? So that was the purpose, Tom, and it's very stable. If we put it in a preservative tube, actually, surprise, surprise, I have a little box. This is what you get as a patient. You get a transport, it's got a cup. If you can hit the cup, then all you do is use a vacutainer, collect the specimen into a preservative, put it in the mail, comes to us. They don't even have to leave home. So that's.
And as you said, this is being adopted by more and more naturopaths and more actual physicians.
That is correct. Absolutely. We go to, now that we're turned loose again, it limited after COVID. We've been to 2 trade shows now in the last 6 weeks, I guess. It's just wonderful. It's just the conversation is so different, especially when you're meeting people for the first time. It's real hard to, if there's somebody on the other side of the camera, well, I've never talked to you before in my life. I got to sit through a whatever to learn something about a sales pitch. And we try not to do sales pitches. We are all about the educational side of things and constantly looking. And what's so exciting now is as we go to these trade shows, we're getting people coming to us saying, I've got a product. And it works and they'll show me, it's worse than the Krebs cycle, which is my example of one of the worst things I ever had to try to memorize. All of these things. And I've got this product that works right here in the scheme. Is there any chance you could develop a test that would tell me if I'm modifying that product with my that kept that reaction with my product? And that's exciting me because we're starting to see more of these. Not just I've harvested another flower or root or something, and I think I've got something that's going to, do whatever. The other part that's so that coincides with this a little is the number of studies, and that's where what Nancy was referring to. We're now doing probably 5 studies, uh, what we call clinical research studies, looking at the effect, whatever the product provider wants, but does your product lower thromboxane? And
What effect does your product have on inflammatory processes in the body, correct?
exactly, Tom. Um, and what's exciting, it's you sort of stick your neck out because there's not a whole lot in the literature. In fact, uh, I, I started not challenging, but questioning people. So how much did you learn about thromboxane in medical school or nature, wherever you went to school? How much did you learn about thromboxane?
Right.
Well, do you have any idea what it's doing inside the body? It just causes vasoconstriction and platelet aggregation or activation, adhesion, aggregation. And it just so happens that that inflammation and that activated platelet is responsible for progression of virtually every chronic disease.
Yeah, almost every chronic disease is going to have that inflammatory process.
Yes. And to me, and I'm working on a educational piece right now on the role in cancer metastasis.
Wow.
And I guess speaking of inflammation, it might make sense. I ran across in the last month or two a paper showing cancer surgery. Obviously, surgery is an inflammatory process. So you're going in to get
Oh,
rid of a
yeah.
cancer. At the same time, you're creating a milieu of inflammation that's going to drive the potential for metastasis. And so a group, I've got a paper that demonstrated, uh, they looked at that and they gave them a resolvin kind of a product before and during the surgery. They followed these patients, those that they were trying to suppress inflammation, and the others standard protocol. And there was about a 30% less metastasis in the patients who got the resolvin. Simply a harmless kind of a product. And if I were going to go in the business of making products, I would be looking for obviously fish oil with the right EPA DHA
Hmm.
provides a lot of those resolvins. But my understanding, I just saw a paper yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to even read it, but looks like CBD may also play, and I don't know generically what that means exactly, but people I think are looking at that. So to me, this is just so exciting, and I think the the, the therapeutic product folks have a great opportunity um, to really come up with data and that will substantiate the claim that not only do I have something that and yes, if you're taking fish oil to relieve arthritic pain, you probably don't need a lab test to tell you that pain's gone. But there's a whole lot of things that you do need that for.
Well, and that's, Gordon, again, to me, that what that implies is the fact that it gives our industry, it gives the creators of new products a way to actually speak to people and say, look, don't take my word for it just because I make a fancy commercial or I have a big advertising budget so I can make things look wonderful. I can show you all pictures of laboratories and scientists and everything, but I can actually now show you a test that's validated that will let you know that yes, this is going the direction that it needs to go in order to resolve. And that's why you call them resolvents, right? Is because they're resolving that situation.
Exactly. And and there might be people saying, well, okay, just because you validated this, is there any support um, to, that backs you up? So you say this is a risk marker. What do you mean? Well, it started in 2002. Actually, it was called the HOPE study, John Eichelboom and a group out of McMaster did a study showing that if people had a myocardial infarct or cardiovascular event, and they were put on aspirin, if the aspirin did not suppress thromboxane sufficiently, there was a 350% increase in second events. And that's when I saw that, because I'd been working with this test for 3 or 4 years. I started before it was a research test, and that's what spurred me into going, okay, because I knew the people, I knew the laboratory that had done that work. So that was followed up by John and a larger group worldwide of the Charisma study, which was retrospective, double-blind, placebo-controlled, the whole thing, and showed the same thing, much larger group. And that was in 2008. Since then, there are papers that show you at a level, um, with our score, we report it as a score instead of, and I don't know, I did this kind of one, I don't know, whim. I said, what we measure is something called 11-dehydrothromboxane B2 and normalize it with creatinine. So, Tom, if I were to give you your result and you were pretty healthy, I would say, congratulations, you have 2,000 picograms of 11-dehydrothromboxane B2 per milligram creatinine.
I'm going to write home and tell my mom.
I hope so. So I said to one of my people, I said, why don't we just drop the last decimal and call it a score? That way, if
Yeah.
you can, no, it's measuring picograms per, that's what it's doing, but just call it a score. So that's caught on actually quite well, and people can. It's kind of like what used to be in the old days: is your cholesterol 250? Oh, that's terrible. Well, is your chronic inflammation test score 500? That's not good. In fact, we just measured a lupus patient a few days ago who was not in a flare. Now she's in a flare. We're testing her again. But yeah, so that's kind of I think the test in a nutshell.
It's absolutely fascinating, Gordon. And what it does from the reason that we wanted to bring you on is the idea that this is not an industry that's not validated. This is not an industry that's not policing itself. And this is definitely as an industry we're growing. As we find, it's like Einstein's famous quote of, the more the shores of your knowledge expand, the bigger your ocean of unknowing becomes. And that's, literally where it is. As we learn more, we suddenly realize how much we don't know yet. And finding tests like this is a way to validate what the industry does in such a fabulous way. And I absolutely salute you. And this is just, I could go on in this discussion because I know that, when the immune system turns on, there has to be inflammation. That's part of the whole process. So we can't demonize inflammation, but what we need to understand is that without controlling it, without getting it to resolve itself and go back to what, in the company that I work for, when we're talking to people about it, we call it let's return to that state of watchful waiting for the next incident to happen, as opposed to saying, okay, we're just going to be on all the time.
I'm sorry for my very disappearing act here. It wasn't intentional. My platform kind of had a hiccup and had to leave and come back. But I was able to hear you, Gordon, the whole time. And it just reminds me of the kind of work, there are so many people who are not well known, they're not famous, and yet at the same time they're doing big, big work. And you are one of them, and your laboratories is absolutely one of them. And we are indebted to you to have this wormhole into mechanisms of action for what I would call groundswell for ill health in the body. And of course, the inflammatory test and the marker that you use for thromboxane is crucial. A lot of people who are herbalists or naturopaths or nutritionists or even people who are in the fitness industry or who are looking to better their health in general would love to understand, well, how does that herb work? how does that nutrient work? Is it working? And can you put them together, just like you said earlier, combining, we were having that, kind of off the cuff conversation, combining aspirin with, with an herb, or aspirin with berberines, dihydroberberine, can get an even better result. And as long as it's safe and we have efficacy, we have a whole new world ahead of us where we have efficacy, we have safety, and we have proof of it, and ongoing ability to continue testing it. So I'm so happy we met, and I'm so amazed at how you continue to be passionate about what you do, in general, and specifically for the natural products industry. So,
Well, I have to interrupt. Thank you, Nancy. And it's people like you, just like you, that give me the desire to continue. People have said, "Aren't you old enough to retire?" And I say, "What do you mean? I just turned 50." Well, maybe it wasn't 50 plus a little bit. And I say, I can't. How can you, when there's such wonderful people to work with, and there are people to, and yeah. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Is there anything you want to add, Tom? Or do you have any other questions?
No, I'm just totally fascinated, because part of what my understanding, Gordon, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding with this is that maybe somebody takes something for a condition, and the condition at first appears to have an improvement, but then all of a sudden they revert back, or they relapse, and they're still taking the same product, but they're relapsing, and they can't figure out why. And it sounds to me like a test like what you're doing is able to paint a bigger picture of what else is going on in their body that is allowing this thromboxane to continue to produce itself, to continue to produce the platelet aggregation, which is going to slow down the supply of oxygen and nutrients to other parts of the body, and can lead to even more chronic infection and chronic diseases. The test that you're talking about is something that can actually shed more light on that.
And I'll leave you from my step with this thought: residual inflammatory risk. That's the other big one. And that refers to Paul Ridker and the group and the Cantos study, where they, heart attacks, tested them, elevated LDLs, gave them a statin, normalized the LDL. Risk is gone. We hope.
Exactly.
What did
Are
they
you sure about that?
What did they do? They followed these individuals. Now, they also did some inflammatory markers at the same time. They followed these individuals for, I think it was 3 years. 50%, and there were lots of second events. 50% of the second events had a normal LDL after the statin. And I think that has application. Maybe poor example, you tested vitamin D3 in a patient, and it was low, so you gave them vitamin D3. We fixed you. We couldn't find anything. Well, are these people still going to have? You've got to look at inflammation. It's still residing if you're not careful. So
agreed. Thank you so much. Thank you. I can't thank you enough. Hopefully we'll have you on again. We'll have more conversations in the future, because you have a lot going on in your laboratory, which of course today we don't have time to go through it, but you have a lot of exciting research happening even now. So,
and I'm also excited to find out all of the other stuff that you've got going on up here, because you obviously have a lot of stuff going on up there, Gordon. Congratulations. There's no such thing as retirement.
Thank you. My wife will love to hear you say that.
I'm sure. I don't want to get in trouble.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to start off with one of my most favorite and most cherished herbs, and that's an herb from the Ayurvedic tradition known as Tulsi. Now, the Latin name for Tulsi is Ocimum sanctum, sanctum meaning holy, and ocimum means it's a type of a basil. It's a holy basil. And in India, it is called Tulsi, and Tulsi literally means the incomparable one, which is really from my own experience and my own personal point of view, and having dealt with this herb for literally just about 50 years now, it absolutely lives up to its name. In fact, Tulsi in Ayurvedic medicine is what's called a rasayana. And a rasayana means something that restores you to your natural, optimal, perfect health. And that health also implies enlightenment and lifelong joy and happiness. So Tulsi is one of those herbs that is absolutely amazing in its effect. From a medicinal standpoint, one of the things that it was most commonly used for medicinally, other than spiritually, is to treat the respiratory system. So it was a wonderful herb that was used to treat coughs and colds, but also things especially like bronchitis or asthma. And, it's been shown that if you combine it with certain heart herbs like Arjuna from the Ayurvedic tradition, that it can also be an amazing cardiovascular herb, a wonderful heart tonic. And, another use of it in colloquial herbal medications or medicines in India was to use it to help to reduce fevers. And, what's the fascinating thing about it is that it turns out that Tulsi is what's called an adaptogen. And adaptogens just literally, take it this way, it allows us to adapt to the normal stress of our daily lives, and that stress no longer plays such a crucial role in determining how we feel or how we're responding to the day. So Tulsi is one of those amazing adaptogens that, when compared to other adaptogens, was found to be extremely great at lowering cortisol levels and reducing that fight or flight feeling within the body. And, the fascinating thing about it to me is that we have now lots and lots of scientific studies that are looking at many of these herbs that have been traditionally used for, in this case, over 3,000 or 4,000 years easily, as major medicinal herbs. And now scientific validation is coming up with the fact that, well, yeah, we validate this, we validate that, we validate this. So some of the therapeutic effects of Tulsi really quickly it's been shown to decrease the incidence of gastric ulcers. It increases endurance. It helps us to respond to stress better, lowers cortisol levels in the body. It's an extremely antioxidant herb. It reduces oxidative stress, and that in turn helps to reduce inflammatory processes in the body, which is something that's extremely important, as we've heard from our guest. And basically, it is also a wonderful herb to protect your liver. So all around, I'm just really enamored with Tulsi, and she has and I call her she because it is a feminine herb, and she has a wonderful place in my life.
Yeah.
So what do you have?
Well, before I move on to that, I just wanted to say that you actually grow this herb. You're very familiar with the plant itself. It's in your yard, right? And
it's in a pot.
And
yes.
you've known it for a long time, years. It's not something new for you. It's definitely
not at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful herb. Yeah. So today I will be talking about L-Theanine, and L-Theanine is anything with an L in front of it means left turning. It means it's an amino acid generally. So L-Theanine is an amino acid that's found not exclusively, but almost exclusively in tea, the plant Camellia sinensis. So, and we're talking about green tea because green tea and white tea, the least processed of the teas, they have the highest concentration or highest volume of L-Theanine. The L-Theanine is synthesized by the plant in its root, and then it's sent up into the plant into the leaves. And then when sunlight hits the leaves, it converts that L-Theanine to catechins, which is a type of acid. So L-Theanine as an isolate was first synthesized using enzymes. So what they do is they do a water extraction, which is tea basically, and then they add enzymes, and then L-Theanine is separated out of the context of the whole plant. And that was done in Japan. And the studies started in 1940, believe it or not, a long, long time ago. And in 1964, the year before I was born, that was a long time ago too, in 1964, Japan approved it as a food additive. So, and if you can only imagine, the Japanese have been drinking green tea for eons. Archaeologically, humans have been drinking green tea for, hold on for this, ready? 500,000 years. It's spectacular. The plant is native to Southeast Asia, but it's cultivated all over the world now. Actually, more than 30 countries on our globe cultivate Camellia sinensis. And there's really only one caution here. So if you're a pregnant mommy or you're breastfeeding, it's probably best not to take it. The caution is based on the fact that there's a restriction to doing that kind of human science with children under the age of 3 or infants and breastfeeding infants. So because that kind of science is restricted, as it should be ethically, right, we're wary of the impact of L-Theanine on breastfeeding mommies. So we do know that green tea given to children and infants may, in some small populations, kind of restrict the absorption of iron, and we don't want to do that. So that's whole green tea, and we don't have enough studies yet on L-Theanine as a nutraceutical compound and infants. But moving on, we do have a lot of research on humans, adults, and L-Theanine. There's one published clinical study that demonstrated that when you take 200 milligrams of L-Theanine, usually that's a suggested serving for anyone who weighs 125 to 150 pounds. But basically they registered the emission of brain waves that are associated with the state of relaxation, which is lovely. Many of us need that. What I love about L-Theanine is that you can take it during the day. It does not sedate you, but it just gives this overall feeling of calm, which helps, especially these days, right? So as far as drug and nutrient interactions, I'm very particular about this. We don't have a lot of information on drug interactions with L-Theanine. We're just starting to amass that. But the 28 interactions that are listed with the FDA, those are related to green tea. 22 of the 28 are related to the caffeine in green tea. And more research is continuing on L-Theanine. Amino acids are considered safe and effective. So that is my little introduction to L-Theanine. It's a favorite of mine, like holy basil is a favorite of yours.
And you know what? I just happened to realize, you're probably wondering, who the heck are these guys and what are they doing? They're kind of goofy. What's going on here? Well, I just wanted to introduce Nan to you. Nan has had a complementary and alternative health and herbal clinic for over 32 years now that has been focused on difficult to treat conditions. And she's also been a spokesperson and an educator in the natural products industry for literally more than 27 years for some of the most reputable and well-known companies in the industry. So she really does know what she's talking about. She walks her talk, and as she mentioned, she's extremely fastidious about what she recommends to people and why she would recommend those things to her clients.
And Tom has his herbal background, his herbal roots that go all the way back to 1970 in Hawaii, the big island of Hawaii, where he was an organic farmer, and he worked with local physicians making fresh organic juices, vegetable juices and fruit juices for their patients. And since then, for the past 30 years, he's worked for two very large and very well-known, very reputable companies in the natural products industry as their herbal educator and trainer. So that's who we are. And now you know. And we'll be doing this podcast twice a month. We'll be interviewing key people and definitely thought leaders in the natural products industry. And if you would please, if you'd like our Facebook page, we're just getting used to this Facebook stuff. So podcast, Facebook, it's all new for us. But here we are. And so like us, share our podcast, if you will, with interested friends and family. And please let us know if there's something you want to hear us talk about. If you're interested in something or you want some in-depth information, go ahead and, leave it in the comments on our Facebook page, or reach out to Tom or reach out to myself, and let us know what you want to hear about, because we would love to share that with you and your circles. Mm-hmm.
So with that, I guess we're about to sign off here. Oh, you know what, Nan? I just realized I forgot to share this with you. You're going to be amazed by this. Did you hear about the optometrist that fell into his grinding machine?
No.
Well, it's pretty embarrassing. He made a spectacle of himself.
Tom! Oh my gosh. We're a couple of goofballs. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, everyone. Until next time, I'm Nan.
And I'm Tom.
And we'll have more great topics and guests in the very near future. So join us right here in 2 weeks as the Supplement Super Sleuth
and the Herbal Storyteller take another deep dive into the fascinating world of the natural products industry.
See you later.